I thought this week we could discuss a topic that's quite hot in the news about made in. Now, with all the conversation around tariffs, everyone's very interested where things are made, and we're having big discussions around that. The truth is, currently, when we look at something and it tells us made in, especially in the textile fashion industry, the information that we have is from the made in label that is hidden somewhere in the garment. If you were to find it and read it, it will tell you it's made in a country. Now, that information, as we would all know by investigating just a little bit, is not true at all. Having started my career in this industry from the back end, which is I started working in a buying agency. That was my first job, which meant that I had to find the cheapest place to make something. And it was really like a puzzle. So you made a decision where something was made depending upon where the cheapest labor for that particular part of the puzzle was found. For example, if you would take a basic t-shirt, there's a huge probability, more than 50% chance, that the fiber is actually coming from the Americas, which is one of the largest producers of cotton in the world. It's a fact that most people don't know about, but until recently, America was the largest exporter of cotton in the world. That cotton fiber then goes all the way to mostly China or that part of the world to be spun into a yarn, which then will get shipped somewhere. That's what more or less where the factory comes in, which will buy that yarn to turn that into a piece of fabric, which will then be cut, sewn, and shipped over to the main warehouse, from where it will then be shipped to wherever the store is. So you can just imagine the number of kilometers this does. And really, if you would think about where this is made, you'd be hard pressed to really give the real true answer. And I think it's something worth looking at, because what are the reasons we decide where something was made? In the old days, it was very much about trying to find the best quality, because globalization isn't a new idea. Human beings have been doing trade from ever since we know how to survive, or we've traveled the world to find things and exchange with each other, things we make. When you think about Marco Polo, when he went to China, he was looking to find what was new and beautiful there and bring it in exchange with what was beautifully made around him. Now we don't do that. When you think about where things are made and why they're made there, it really has been about trying to find where the regulations are lax enough, where the labor is not protected enough, where people are desperate enough to be able to work for next to nothing. And what a shame it is, because when you think about it, most of these countries, I'd say most countries all around the world, have a very rich textile history. We've always made clothes. We've always needed clothes from a very long time. And most of the time we made them from things that were around us before we started to travel the world and find things in different places and made that into an industry. So clearly when you pick up that t-shirt and look at the made in label, that's a very misleading piece of information. The question now is, what could we do? How could we change this? And for that, I always look around to other industries that have probably had a similar situation and have made change. And an industry that's very close to my heart is, without doubt, the wine industry. I live in Spain, and I have actually lived through a real revolution in the wine industry here. When I arrived in Spain over 20 years ago, there was literally maybe 2 or 3 kind of grapes. It was a pretty industrial way of producing. I'd say a lot of production of Spanish wine was really as a supplier to some of the bigger winemaking labels in Italy or France. There were just few good Spanish labels, but not a lot. What has really happened in the last 20 years is that there has been a rediscovery and a storytelling and actually a huge investment into finding local grape varieties, because these local grape varieties are actually very much linked to the land. They were from a specific place. They grew because there was a specific kind of soil in that area. And before you find the local varieties and go into this, you need to also have a market that wants it. And clearly the wine industry has been really good at creating this market. For example, if you look at champagne, you can, in a blind test, probably think a cava is just as good as a champagne, but they have created a very clear demarcation of what champagne is, what is the area, the geographical location, the kind of grape that grows there, the process with which that wine is made, and that has become the definition of champagne. And if any label or brand wants to make a champagne, it has to go to that area, to those people, to get champagne made. We did that in our industry with Harris Tweed. So in 1930s, they declared that the only people who could use the label Harris Tweed were the crofters who made the fabric on the island. So you had to be an independent weaver, which was a fantastic idea because that way a big industry couldn't just move in and make everyone just a worker. You had to be this independent weaver, having the weaving equipment in your shed, in your backyard. And that is the only way you would belong to this cooperative. Everything is woven on the island. Mostly, I believe, the fiber comes from the island. Major brands have used Harris Tweed, and you'd have a brand like Vivienne Westwood or Martin Margiela that will put their label, and right next to it will put the Harris Tweed label. Now that's wonderful when you think about value creation. This has helped the weavers to get paid more. This has helped the consumer to understand how interesting it is when a fiber and a fabric has a story and is linked to the culture of the place. We have so many opportunities. I mean, when you think about cashmere, that would be a perfect place of attack. I tried doing that with a project I have still working on called the IOU project. I was obsessed when we started to get this interesting possibility to have technology at our hands. We built this in 2010, where I was obsessed with the idea that if somebody were to buy a piece and very easily be told where that fiber, that fabric came from, the name of the person, their relationship with that piece would change completely. So what do? We went to South India and I started working with the Madras weavers. The reason I picked Madras was, well, one, my father used to wear Madras when he would come back from his he was an Air Force officer. He'd get back take off his wonderfully glamorous Air Force outfit, his pilot outfit, and change into a lungi. And that's something I still remember, and I have big fondness for it. A lungi is a piece of fabric, 2 meters long, that men in most of Southeast Asia wear, wrapped around them as a sarong. But the unfortunate part is, even though Madras checks lungis have been woven in South India for over 800 documented years, now it's very hard to find lungi weavers because they're not getting paid enough. This fabric got popular, famous. First the British took it went all the way to Caribbean, then of course to the New World. The Americans adopted it. I mean, all of you, I'm sure, probably remember the Madras from the preppy look and then the bleeding Madras. But the unfortunate part and the real story behind is that most of the fabric used as Madras, it does not come from Madras. It is mostly not handloom woven for sure. It's probably power loom. And the real Madras weavers are truly struggling to think about what their futures are. Their children do not want to do this because they do not get paid enough. And even in India, they're getting the competition from the local power loom. So here's a problem I thought was big enough to address. And I went to work with one of the largest cooperatives in South India, started by Mahatma Gandhi in 1927. When I arrived there, I was shell-shocked to see they still had over 250,000 members in the cooperative, but most of them were really not weaving full-time because there was not enough work available. We documented about 253 of these master weavers. That took us a good 3 to 4 years. We had really amazing help from my dear friend Lisa Heidlove, who runs a nonprofit called Going to School, to help us open bank accounts for with these weavers so we can pay them directly. We had big conversations around what the actual cost of these goods were. The weavers were being paid pittance, so we had to sit down and discuss with them what they thought they should be paid. And now we've been working with them since 2010. We buy the fabric from the cooperative. The weaving cooperative decides what the cost of the fabric is. I never intervene in what the pattern that is being made is. I mean, these people have been weaving it for over 800 years. Who am I to come and tell them what they should be weaving? But coming back to the story, what did I want to do with this? I thought the best way to give a denomination of origin was maybe embed the piece with its entire story. So back then, we were one of the first ones. We built a small piece of technology which allowed us to put a QR code in the piece. And the minute you scanned it, you'd get to see who the weaver was. Then we would buy the fabric from them. It would come to our atelier in Europe and we cut and sew the piece here. Why did I do that? I thought that the Indians knew how to weave. They've been weaving fabric for centuries. They are experts at it, especially cotton and silks. And was I to teach them? I would definitely learn from them how to make things better. Whereas making a jacket or a pant is something that an Italian, a European knows how to do. When I walk into an Italian factory, I can design a jacket, but I can tell you that the Italian pattern maker or the Italian sewer will teach me how to make a really well-fitted jacket. It was a really interesting 2-year experiment. A lot of building had to be done. A lot of hard conversations had to be had. And we went online in 2011, and my life changed ever since. It was a very novel idea. I won a lot of attention, awards for this, but it wasn't so easy to extend the idea to a lot of people because there's so much resistance from the industry itself. I approached mostly the higher end, luxury people. I thought they'd be super interested. I realized they were not really that interested because they were really much more interested in not letting people find out who their sources was, which was quite heartbreaking for me. I was quite naive about that. And then I went on to realize that the only place I could find that desire to do what I was doing or other people who were doing it were the smaller brands, the artists, the artisans. And that sort of led me to what I'm doing right now, which is, part of what my work is to do this community called XTANT. At XTANT, we come together, we bring the artisans and the artists directly in contact with the final consumer so that they can get to see who and what is made and why things are made there. For example, we work with the Kutch community that grows their own cotton that had nearly disappeared, called Kala cotton, another form of cotton that is grown only with rainwater. And it is incredibly, incredibly sustainable because Kutch is an area that gets not very much of rainfall, and this is a perfect variety of cotton. Of course, the industry wasn't very interested in this because the yield is much lower. But the weavers got together and decided they wanted to work with this particular cotton, and it is them who has revived this and brought it to forth in the industry. So there's a lot of really cool examples that I can continue to give you, and I get all excited about, and lots of places where we can truly make a difference by wanting to understand not just made in, but made by who and why. From the point of view of the consumer, the reaction was super interesting. They were, mostly when you sell things online, there's a very large, anyone who sells online will tell you, there's a huge return rate. Most people will buy things and it's easy to return them. There's nearly a 30% return rate in a traditional online business. But in our case, it was less than 5%. And I always wondered why that was. And I think it's because, one, each piece was unique. They knew they couldn't get another piece that was exactly the same. Besides which, they knew the name of the person who had made the piece. So if it didn't fit them, it was a little bit bigger or smaller, they would write to us and say, I really love the fabric. I can buy another piece. I'll gift this to someone else. That happened so many times that it really became a really interesting conversation, to the point sometimes we would get emails and phone calls from customers who were saying things like, I'm going to India. I would love to go meet with my weaver. And of course, there was always an interesting conversation about India is quite large. Where exactly are you going in India? And where you're going might be hundreds of kilometers away. But some people did. They actually went hundreds of kilometers down south to Tamil Nadu, got into a car in Chennai, drove for a good 4 to 5 hours to go meet with their weaver in a weaving community. That was magical for us. I mean, not only was it incredible for them to see where things are made and who makes them, but even for that weaver, it really changed their position in the society where they were living. When you think about it, nobody was wanting to be a weaver anymore, and now someone comes from all over across the world to come and find your father, your aunt, your uncle, because they're a weaver and they think they're cool. That changes the perception for the young person in that village, and they can actually look at that being something very cool. The other thing that was super interesting was, in our industry where I've worked, a large part of our work used to be about quality assurance. And, we did all these AQL systems, which are borrowed from the military complex of how to measure quality, which is quite a joke always anyway. But the question was really interesting, was we were really concerned with quality and spent a lot of money around quality assurance. In IOU, when I started working, the weavers had a code number which let us know which fabric came from that weaver. And then when the piece was put up online, the photograph of that weaver, the video of that weaver came up immediately. We bring this in by shipping containers, and it takes a while to get here. And the second container was getting a little delayed. So when I called, I was worried that there might be some issues about, there's a lot of, all kinds of weather issues that happen in that area. And when I called, I found out there wasn't the cyclone. It was actually the weavers were weaving slower because now they saw that their face was right next to the cloth and they wanted to make sure it was perfect. Just by giving them authorship, we had returned pride back to them. That fascinated me. I mean, they had decided what price they were selling it to us, but normally in any condition, people want to make more money. I mean, they are making more money than they normally make, but, it's still, in my humble opinion, not enough. And I feel like the work they do deserves so much more. But they decided that they wanted to go slower to make sure that the quality was so much better, because now it was them, their face, that represented that. I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful way to see the reaction, these things. And of course, the bargaining power. They don't only work with us, they work with the as a cooperative, they got together and negotiated higher prices. That's something I'm always very proud of. I got into some trouble for it. I got some pushback from people saying, oh, what you're doing is you're, confusing them about what the market value of their product is. And I don't think so. We always have a conversation every year, depending upon the cost of cotton and depending upon the complexity of design. They decide what the fabric price should be. And we start from that. The other interesting thing that has also happened since IOU came to picture was the conversation around the fact that Madras is a place, and now it's called Chennai, and it's important to do the denomination of origin. In fact, I was involved. The cooperative had another wing to it that actually worked with the local sari weavers, and they started to put a little tag with a picture on every single sari from that area to talk about the denomination of origin. So in a very little way, I felt like we did make a difference. And then that conversation of made by became much bigger. We started a hashtag in 2010 called Who Made My Clothes? No one gave much importance to it. We didn't have a huge marketing budget until about 2013, when the unfortunate accident in Rana Plaza in Bangladesh happened, where more than 1,100 people were burned in a factory fire. Not the first factory fire, but fortunately at that moment there was a well-known journalist on the ground who was able to take the pictures and put it up all front page news all over the world, and it caught the world's imagination. How could it be possible? 100 years after the Brook fires in New York factories, this was happening somewhere else in the world. And that has led to some change, lots of conversations. There's been an incredible movement that is called the Fashion Revolution movement that made that possible. But I'm really proud of the fact that we started that conversation, and it has gone on and continues to go on, and I hope it goes on further, because we still need to do so much more than just putting up the picture of the weaver or the artisan. We need to shift the power to them so that they decide what they want to charge for the work that they do. And I feel like it is a good way for me as a designer to interact with them. I do not want to use them as laborers to a design that I've drawn and they just have to make it. The fabric comes to Europe, and then I, with a team, make a decision on what fabric gets cut into what kind of a jacket or pant or scarf. So there is definitely a collaboration, but there is a lot of input from the weaver, because at the end of the day, what you get to see is the pattern of the madras. And I always encourage other designers, other brands to think about collaboration with artisan communities like that. They know what they make because they've been making it for hundreds of years in most cases. It would be amazing to actually first learn why they use a fiber, what kind of colors they use, what kind of motifs they use, and then work with them to innovate from there and to reflect current culture. But to just use them as a labor input is quite sad. And in my humble opinion, a lost opportunity. So I'm hoping that more of us start to think about what the wine industry and the culinary industry has done, of taking the denomination of origin, of giving back a value to the people who make. I mean, more young people want to be chefs today than 25 years ago. Maybe we still need a few Anthony Bourdains in our industry to talk about the processes and to talk to people about the people behind who make the things and make people fall in love with this. But I think there's a big opportunity to make this much better for everyone involved.